No wonder the Tau are oppressing the crew, they don't want to be taken over. And yes, the Tau are oppressing the crew, we'll be getting into that in a later video. And speaking of oppressed races, the Vespid Neutron Blaster. This one's a weird one. It's essentially fueled by a unique crystal found on the Vespid homeworld, which is energetic and unstable, and can be modulated through the vibrations generated by the Vespid's wings. The crystal is mounted on a case that projects neutrons through the crystal, and delivers a blast so powerful it can punch through most armor. And also, uniquely enough, it can only be fired by a Vespid, as no other creature can modulate the vibrations in the crystal.
Okay. I, honestly, 100% could find nothing to figure out how this weapon works. To state this is literally for me to have to admit defeat on this one. The crystal is a non-organic crystal that is not made by the Vespids, nor is it something the Vespids normally or ritually have interacted with. It is simply something that grew on their homeworld that happened to grow near them. The Tau have taken this and weaponized it. But there is no creature that I could find as an analog to figure out how a creature could take an unstable... Basically, the crystal, as far as I can tell, would be an unstable radioactive isotope, and use the natural vibrations and movements of its body to stabilize it enough to allow you to pour a stream of neutron death, which, by the way, neutron particles and neutron physics is fucking crazy. To illustrate just what this is doing, this is the equivalent of standing your target in a particle accelerator and pressing the on switch. They're gonna vaporize. I have no idea, not even a clue, as to how this weapon can interact and fire such a burst of energy and still be restricted by the vibrations of Vespid wings. 40k theories? I have a theory for you. Have at it! How does a Vespid weapon actually work? And where did these crystals come from? Or what chaos entity came up with them?
Okay, the answer, it was Creed. There you go. Job done.
But yes, I could not math. This is why it took me so long to record this episode, actually, because I had to keep rechecking calculations to see if I could find a way to math the neutron blaster, and I couldn't.
So perhaps you might have been able to find the maths for this one. The railgun. Now, at its most basic form, the railgun is a linear accelerator using standard wave acceleration along a number of cylindrical superconductive electrodes surrounding a barrel. This technology is used to propel a solid slug at hypervelocity capable of penetrating even the toughest enemy armor. There are also heavy railguns, which are capable of taking out super heavy vehicles and even Warhound Scout Titans, and they are capable of firing special submunition rounds guided by a drone-level intelligence fitted with stabilizing fins for extra lift and range in atmosphere.
Okay. Are you ready for this one? The railgun, with how it works with the Tau, basically works the same way as the railgun of the Zolot-class destroyer currently being produced by the United States. They take a big chunk of metal, ionize it and magnetize it so that it is all one polarity, and then simply reverse the polarity of the barrel in order to match the polarity of the round inside, in order to propel the round out of the barrel at extreme velocity. However, there are a couple little issues here. First and foremost, railguns take a lot of power. To illustrate how much power is based upon the size of the railgun. The smaller the railgun, the more power it actually requires to achieve the same velocity. So, for instance, the destroyer in question has 2 gas turbine engines that generate 35 megawatts of power each. One of those engines is just there to power the guns. The other engine is there to power the rest of the ship. For this railgun to function and travel and fire a shot capable of traveling 1,200 meters per second, which is the required speed for the element tungsten to be able to penetrate tank armor, would require 31 megawatts of total power. That is the short end of these calculations this time. Wait till the long end. The other problem is that electromagnets, no matter how you do it, are not a lightweight material. Magnetic materials, particularly high magnet materials, are almost always heavy. Very heavy. To get around this, you would need to create a field of some sort to reduce the weight of the gun, but since no such technology has been said to exist in Warhammer 40k, and most of this type of tech I see from sci-fi for things like Star Trek warp engines or Star Wars hyperspace engines, I really have to ask, how heavy is a Tau railgun? Well, if we're talking about a railgun capable of propelling around at 1,200 meters per second and weighing and generating an electric charge of 31 megawatts, the railgun weighs around 380 kilograms. This is why railguns right now are only mounted to ships, because they weigh a crap load. And we know of no way to reduce that weight as of yet, because the electromagnets to be useful at propelling large caliber slugs at extremely high velocities have to be incredibly dense metals with high magnetic properties. So, this explains why Tau broadsides, for instance, when they walk around with their railguns, and the man-portable version is 380 kilograms. I don't want to know how much the broadside version is, considering he has to stop, plant his feet, and dig into the ground to fire those massive cannons. The tank variant probably weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of a metric ton on its own. And the massive variant that goes on the ships, such as the Manta Ray, if I compare it in size to the variant that goes on a Tau Hammerhead, and both are to the same scale, the massive Manta Ray railgun weighs 47 metric tons.
That's a big gun.
That is a massive gun. I am doing this all under the assumption that we are using ionized iron as the magnetic principle behind firing these weapons. If we're actually using rare earths, such as lithium or thulium magnetized, which is the same rare earth magnets that you would use for, say, on your models that you have sitting on your table right now, those are stupidly heavy too. As a matter of fact, a simple stack of rare earth magnets stretching down my finger weighs over 1 kilogram. To get a rare earth magnet big enough to propel this would still weigh 102 kilograms for a Tau man-portable rail rifle. So, Tau, what are these made out of? Please tell me. I would love to find out that element.
For all we know, it could be a unique element only ever found on the Tau homeworld.
Then there would not be near as many of these, I would guarantee you that.
True. So moving on, we're going to be looking at the pulse arc cannon. Now, the pulse arc cannon is a type of heavy pulse weapon that uses aggressive reactive charge technology to hyper-accelerate plasma energy. When fired, a stream of negatively charged particles are expelled from the gun milliseconds before the main plasma charge, accelerating a plasma burst into the target to explosive effect.
So Tau, what happened? You started off really practical, like with, pulse rifles that I could make sense of, and combat armor that made sense, and then you got into this. This gun is a giant FU to physics. I established in part one of this 2-part video series that the Tau pulse rifle was very slow. This says it uses a stream of charged particles to expel the round at a higher rate by using the charged particles as a miniaturized acceleration barrel leading up to the target. No. Plasma does not work that way when in use of properties of magnetic acceleration. When using magnetic acceleration for plasma, most of the time it stays in a contained unit and is expelled out of the contained unit at high velocity via a conduit or airlock-like device in order to allow the plasma a sudden release point from which its magnetized cell can push it out of. In this case, since the particles are not contained in any way, shape, or form, the plasma would be attracted to the particles, and therefore would travel to the point at which the particles were the most dense. Usually, the point at which the particles tend to coalesce where the most magnetism is present in the atmosphere. They would not continue to travel down the length of the negatively charged particles to the target. Some of them would, but very few of them.
So correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong in my understanding of this, but are you saying that if you fire this gun, the plasma is just going to go back into the barrel?
When you close up the barrel and begin to charge the next shot, yes, the plasma would start accelerating back towards the wielder.
That sounds pretty orky.
When you fire repeated shots into the air, the plasma would actually coalesce and just sit there hovering in the air until the negatively charged particle is dissipated, at which point it would float to the ground and incinerate whatever's underneath it.
That just sounds hilarious now.
Here's what you would see. You would see this weapon fire. It would travel, stop about midway to the target where the charged particles are the densest, because that's the point at which the charged particles would achieve their maximum velocity and begin to decelerate. And so at that point is where the charged particles would be the most dense from being pushed out of the barrel. And it would stop there and stick in the midair and just hover. Then when you begin to charge the gun back up to fire again, the plasma charge will be attracted to the negatively charged particles that are now being charged up in the gun, until they're expelled again, at which point both plasma charges would coalesce together and stick at the same point they did before, until all of the negatively charged particles that you originally expelled in order to, quote, guide the charge, dissipate, at which point it would drop to the ground and basically melt into the ground like a fiery ball of plasma. I don't get why people think that plasma explodes on impact. It doesn't explode. Yes, there's a flash evaporation on the target from everything that just got hit being turned into plasma, but plasma itself just kind of melts into you. And by melts into you, I mean like melts into you as in melts you like a metal, like putting a blowtorch to a piece of metal. In short, this weapon, the way it's described as working and the way it's described as acting is completely counterintuitive to physics, engineering, and general principles of laws of motion.
In other words, this weapon is useless, essentially.
This weapon is pure bollocks. And I'm sorry to Tau fanboys, you started off strong in part 1, you were amazing up till the rail rifle, and then we suddenly had issues of electromagnets are really heavy. And now we have issues of, this is not how plasma works. Nor is this how the properties of magnetism work. Effectively, the only thing that would get hit on the target, it would look like, instead of a fiery ball of doom slamming into them and melting into their body and creating a huge chunk of them missing, it would be slightly annoying blue fiery cigarette burns. With the majority of the plasma just kind of hovering in air as kind of like a volleyball that won't come down.
So let's see if the Tau can redeem themselves with the final weapon we're looking at today, which is the ion cannon. Now, the ion cannon is a powerful weapon mounted on large vehicles and starships. It operates by generating a stream of high-energy ionized particles and launching them at a target using an electromagnetic field. Here we go again with the electromagnets. These particles react explosively with the target, transferring tremendous energy at the atomic level. The resulting vaporization only magnifies the amount of damage dealt, with starship-based models being comparable to Imperial Lancers.
Okay. So first off, ion cannons are probably very heavy because they use electromagnets as one of their means of propulsion. However, since the ionized particles are high energy ionized particles, I had to determine what ionized particles would have sufficient energy to travel at close to the speed of light when ionized and projected through an electromagnetic field. This turns out to be uranium, which is used in fission and fusion reactions. The tau ion cannon is in fact not an ion cannon as we know ion cannons. Ion indicates that you gather ions in the air, such as what we have. For instance, we have ion engines. They're just not very fast. We actually use them on the Voyager spacecraft in order to make sure it would continue to propel itself virtually indefinitely. But again, they don't propel you very quickly. This thing's actually a fusion blaster. A giant fusion blaster. Oh. It's literally creating an ionized fusion effect out of radioactive material, because radioactive material is going to be about the only thing you can get high energy ionized particles to travel down an electromagnetic field at extreme velocity to reach close near speed of light velocity blast. Furthermore, it's not only doing this, but as it travels through the air due to the extreme high temperature and velocity and the laws of friction, it is actually plasmifying the particles in the air it touches. While this does not create a chain reaction because it does not have the compression nor the makeup of energy in the air to create the chain reaction, as the ion cannon stream bleeds off at longer range, considering it's shooting roughly a 2 kilogram projectile of plasmified particles, which, as we discussed earlier, 0.11 kilograms is roughly 98 centimeters cubed. 2 kilograms, or nearly 20 times the weight, is gonna be 20 times the size. Which means that this is firing a beam of death roughly the size of a person. Since the plasma bolt, as we discussed with the pulse rifle in part 1 again, travels at roughly 4.6% of the size of a human body. At 20 times the size, you're just short of 100% the size of a human body. So, that's a lot of plasma. That's a lot of fusion-y doom. But more importantly, because it's creating the fusion effect in the air and retroactively changing the ionization of the particles in the air to match its own ionization, as the beam bleeds off mass while traveling, it actually accelerates at the same rate. This means that it doesn't lose any of its kinetic energy. You are effectively being hit with near the same amount of kinetic force as you are being hit with the same amount of thermal energy dissipation at the other end of the barrel, which comes out to a whopping, get this one, for the fusion effect of uranium, of nearly 8,000 degrees Celsius.
Essentially, you're just going to be turned into a pile of dust.
You are going to not only be turned into a pile of dust, but you are being hit so hard because at near speed of light velocity, 2 kilograms is hitting you with the same force at which if Earth and Mars traveling through space on opposite axes were to impact into each other. You are going to fly back nearly a quarter mile or slam into the first object you find and shatter it to little bits while you liquefy against it from just kinetic impact alone, much less the thermal transfer that ashified most of your torso. Did the Tau redeem themselves? Yes. This is a weapon that could actually not only be built, but we could, in very short order, if we got fusion to generate more power than it takes to make fusion happen, be able to generate such a weapon in the next 20 years. The problem behind all of this, however, is that the thermal dissipation into the object is not going to be unilateral because of the impact force driving the object out of the way. Yes, you're going to blow through the front of the tank, but the tank is likely to get knocked out to the side and spin off to the side and only have its frontal armor melted completely off, with the crew inside, while maybe having a concussion and very rattled at the experience they just had, being relatively okay, and so long as the ammunition was secure, not having the ammunition exploded. Granted, there's now a giant front hole and a very big draft going into the tank.
Yeah. Okay, and that was the last one we were looking at today. So overall, how did the Tau do compared to the other armies we've looked at so far?
Most of their weapons are practical and have real-world physics applied to them. Things such as the long-shot pulse rifle, the rail rifle, and the neutron blaster, as well as the pulse arc cannon, don't make a lot of sense to use. Or at least, don't make a lot of sense in terms of physics. The neutron blaster in particular, I can't even figure out, and a railgun, having to carry around a gun that weighs as much as a person seems a bit... Actually, it weighs about 120% more than a person. Seems a bit ludicrous. The pulse arc cannon, I don't even understand why it would be used. I could just imagine sitting on the battlefield in front of a bunch of Tyranids and you fire it and it stops just short and the Tyranid's just like, huh?
Pretty light. Pretty light.
But,
okay.
Their armor's pretty good, actually, and their basic idea of using heat as a weapon is sound.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps up for this edition of Men at Arms. Join us next time where we'll actually be looking at the Space Marines. I know that's a very much requested one. Anyway, so this has been Remlays.
And this has been Fiaura.
And we'll see you all again next time.
We'll see you then, and you can hate me in the comments.